Right, so welcome to this first session, parallel session under the title, How Does Information Governance Impact Health Data Quality? Should quality of assurance of EHR systems be market pull or market push? That is the topic of today. And I'm very pleased to be your chairman today. So my name is Sundgren, and I am the Senior Industry Scientific Director for IHD. And I'm going to guide you through this panel today, including our audience on remote. So welcome, and sorry for the 5 minutes delay. I will try to see to that you have an appropriate time for lunch. So I would also be the timekeeper. So every presenter have 12 minutes, and I will give you a heads up on 11. So with that, we have a very nice setup of speakers today. So we are starting off with Ruben Roex, Professor of Ghent University, then followed by Christophe Maes, Business Developer of IHD, then followed by Richard Yeatman, Chief Technical Officer of IgniteData, and Daniel Otzoy, is that? Digital Health Technical Advisor, Jon Snow Incorporated. And then we have Darren Lloyd, Associate Director, Information Governance, Patient Safety, Digital Health and Care of Wales. That is the setup. So without further ado, Ruben, the floor is yours.
All right. Hi, everyone. I don't know how I stay in the frame. I hope that thing does. Yeah. Hi, everyone. My name is Ruben Roex. I am an associate assistant at the University of Ghent, but I'm also a lawyer active for a specialized law firm that is active in everything that has to do with data and IT. And today it is my pleasure to sort of serve as the person who gets to introduce this session. My goal for today is not to bore you with too much of the legal stuff in detail. What I am going to try to do is to give you a first overview of the legal instruments that are out there, which are relevant in this domain, sort of as a context setting for the other speakers. That's the purpose of my talk. I've got 12 minutes, so I'll quickly check on the clock when my 12 minutes are up, because I'm a lawyer and I tend to talk all the time, so I need to be aware of my own flaws.
Have you got your chest off with you?
All right, so without further ado, let's get started. First, I'll cover a quick introduction. I'll give a quick introduction to the legal framework, which is in full flux. I'll look at the challenges that are posed by the current data protection framework, because if we talk about information governance, data quality, from a legal perspective, we're often drawn into the data protection sphere. Because let's face it, the General Data Protection Regulation, the GDPR, which I'm sure most of you will know, was the first very comprehensive instrument which led to a massive uptake in legal focus and compliance with regard to the way data is processed, in that particular case, personal data. But while the GDPR was a great, very ambitious legal project, it has given rise to certain challenges, especially in the health data space. So, given that those challenges are there, we will then look at a few new legal instruments, some currently as proposals, other ones already approved, which try and remediate some of the issues that the data protection framework has not been able to remedy. So without further ado, let's get started. The legal framework governing information governance and data quality, from where I'm sitting, from my talk today, is mainly composed of the instruments that I put in the blue boxes. If a client of mine would ask me what are the instruments that I would have to look at, given that I'm a data holder of large amounts of health data, what is for me the most important thing to look at? I would probably refer as the four on the slide. General Data Protection Regulation is an obvious one. I've already touched upon that. It is in force. It is a regulation, meaning that in theory, it should be the same everywhere across Europe, but it regulates personal data. So it has a very specific scope. The next one, the Data Governance Act, also already in force, will be applicable from next year onwards. So in force means that legally it's become part of our legal framework, but its provisions as of yet are not yet applicable for the stakeholders within the European Union. It's a regulation, so in theory it should apply again the same everywhere. And it mainly sets the framework for voluntary data sharing. The European Union has noted that although we already had an open data directive, which allowed public bodies to share data with the market, there are certain categories of data which are not easily to be shared by those public bodies. Personal data, confidential data, trade secrets, etc. To remedy that, the European Union came up with Data Governance Act. So it's there. Another relevant thing, it's still in proposal stage. It's not yet definitive, but to be honest, we're looking at an instrument that will be there quite soon, actually. It's the Data Act. The Data Act, again, will be a regulation. For some reason, the European Union right now has this weird tack of starting to name its instruments acts, while in practice, they're actually all of them are regulations. And what the Data Act mainly tries to do is to reset the balance of true controllership over data and data sets, mainly in the IoT space, where devices and services connected to devices generated data, but that data is mainly held by the manufacturer of the product or the provider of the service. And what the Data Act tries to do is to shift control back to the users of the service. And then we've got the European health data space. It's again a regulation. It's actually called a regulation on the European health data space, but it's such a mouthful, so I will just be calling it the European health data space. It's in the proposal phase. Again, a regulation. The goal there is to facilitate primary and secondary use of health data with a very comprehensive scheme of, how should I say, disclosing and making available the health data that's out there. Again, a proposal, very ambitious project, but if you look at the proposal, and we'll see that in a moment, there are quite a few surprising elements in there, which, in my opinion, indicates that this proposal still has a bit of a way to go before this is a fully matured legal instrument. Those are the main ones. But of course, when we talk about health data, there are quite a few other instruments that do touch upon information governance and data quality from other angles. Thinking about the Patients' Rights Directive, the Medical Devices Regulation, Digital Services Act, AI Act, but you could also talk about, I don't know, the Clinical Trial Directive would probably be a very relevant one. I mean, there are so many out there that it only shows how varied and diverse the legal framework really is. Now, I've got 12 minutes, meaning that obviously I won't be talking about all these instruments. I gotta do cherry picking, and I will be talking about the new ones that are coming up. Now, those new ones, they are to an extent intended to remedy a problem caused by the current data protection framework, the GDPR. The problem with the GDPR was, while it was very ambitious and very effective to protect personal data in a lot of areas and harmonize the way protection is organized and distributed across Europe, with regard to health data, it left quite a big room for national interpretation and initiatives to the member states. No problem, please join. That in turn led to a patchwork of different interpretations and requirements. A good initiative, a good example could be if you want to do pharmacovigilance in France as a pharmaceutical company, the French Data Protection Authority requires you to do a dedicated data protection impact assessment with its own requirements. That only applies in France. It's nowhere else the case, not at least that model that the French use. And in many of these areas of processing health data, you have these national interpretations. And that, of course, creates barriers to the way data subjects can exercise their rights. So that's the patient perspective. But at the other end, it creates massive issues for private and public sector bodies to be able to use the health data that is out there. And And the COVID-19, that's at least the motivation that the European Commission has given to the health data space regulation. The COVID-19 pandemic has made that very, very clear that these barriers are there, and that if you want to have a pan-European response, that the legal frameworks should be made a bit more. So, 3 instruments have been launched. One of them is already in place, and I'll briefly touch each one. The Data Governance Act, as I said, it intends to make it possible for, mainly for public bodies, to be able to share the data that they hold that typically would be protected, either as personal data or commercial sensitive or trade secret, etc. So the goal is mainly to make that possible. Now, what the Data Governance Act also does, and especially in the private market that's very relevant, is it creates this new category of stakeholders called data intermediation services providers, which should be seen as sort of broker between data holders and data users. And it wants to create that new set of stakeholders as stakeholders that are not influenced or motivated by ancillary services that they typically provide. So they should be these neutral brokers that are only involved in this making available data from holders to users. They should not be using their intermediation services to sell ancillary services. Very obvious one, take Google, very large company. It has a whole range of services. It can serve as a company disclosing information from one side of the market to the other, but of course they have this whole range of other services that they provide on top of it, so they are not really neutral to an extent. The ISPs will have to notify their activities to the competent authorities, and they will get a logo, and they need to follow with a few strict requirements, one of which, and the most important in my opinion, would be the neutrality thing. There will be data altruism organizations. Those are typically not-for-profit organizations that facilitate the sharing of data and making available of data. Again, they need to comply with certain legal requirements. They have to register. There will be a European rule book, and there will be a nice label or logo. That's the Data Governance Act in a very, very short version. Then the Data Act. Not an instrument yet, a proposal. The Data Act, second bullet on the slide, is mainly concerned with giving rights to the user to access the data that's generated by products and services. Simple example, can think of an insulin pump, an electronic digital insulin pump that generates a massive amount of data. That data is typically held by the medtech company providing the solution, product. Now, what the Data Act would do is make that data available to the user free of charge in a convenient way, where possible directly, etc., etc. So that's the Data Act's main focus. There are a whole lot of other things that instrument governs, but that is the main thing. The Data Act goes broader than personal data. Let that be very clear. The Data Act is concerned with all types of information. Now, the tricky thing about the Data Act, to me, that will be, as a lawyer then, that will be the most difficult thing, is that the Data Act introduces certain data transfer requirements and restrictions to third countries outside of Europe, the same way as we know them under the GDPR. Now, for those of you who are involved with GDPR and personal data, you will know that data transfers outside of Europe, very difficult at the moment, given the very stringent interpretation given by the European Court of Justice. The Data Act will now do the same for data generated by those devices. Okay. Last instrument that I quickly want to touch upon, 1 minute, European Health Data Space Regulation. What it wants to do, or what it should do, is what the European Commission says that it should do, is making sure that health data is being unlocked for primary and secondary use. Primary use meaning better healthcare, secondary use meaning being able to serve public interest, research, innovation, etc. How will it do that? It will create a legal framework for sharing personal and non-personal health data. that immediately raises one of the biggest problems for me, which is that concept of non-personal health data, which is this intermediate category of data that floats between personal and anything else. Don't really see how that will work in practice, but that's to be resolved in. With regard to the primary use provisions, it's mainly focused on electronic health records systems, making them mandatory across the EU where they're not mandatory yet, making sure that those electronic health record systems comply with CE marking, etc., imposing rules for manufacturers, etc., etc. Secondary use then, there, the European Health Data Space comes up with this model of having a health data access body, which will facilitate data held by data holders. Think hospitals, pharmaceutical companies, I mean, think about anyone. Providing that to a health data access body who then makes that available to health data users. It will work on a basis of permits. You will petition for access via a permit system. And then there are a whole bunch of rules on data quality and utility. Main challenges to be overcome, I think, for the health data space, at least from my perspective as a data protection lawyer. The concept of non-personal health data is, in my opinion, contradictory. It says non-personal health data is anything that does not fall under Article 4.1 of the GDPR. But then if you read at the interpretation that they give to it later on, it sort of comes back into that personal data space. So it's very weird. There is this inherent contradiction at the moment between the obligation for data holders to provide unrestricted access to non-personal health data to everyone, and at the same time, they are not allowed to transfer non-personal health data to third countries where there's a risk of re-identification. Inherent contradiction. And then a very complex joint controller setup that they introduce between health data access bodies and users on the one hand, and then the data holders and users in certain cases on the other. Another very complicated problem that I'm looking forward to see how they will resolve this. This is where I will wrap up. I think I bit over, but I hope that's not a problem.
In order not to trespassing on the other times, allow one question, and then we have discussions after all presentations. Do we have one questions either from the
I will put up the chat.
The online attendees or Nathan?
Your comments about joint controller definitions are really interesting, Ruben. Do you feel that historically with GDPR, I know it's only been around for a year, that there's been an ongoing issue with identifying where a joint controller relationship exists over the above a several data controller relationship, especially in the area of consortium-based research?
Yes, I do think there is a massive problem with the joint controller qualification. You see how, on the one hand, industry does everything to avoid that qualification at all times, whereas, in my opinion, you now see the European legislator, when drafting legislation, almost always sort of refer back to the joint controllership qualification. And that, to me, creates inherent conflict. The problem that I refer to in my slide specifically highlights it very well. We have this data holder that holds health data, must disclose it to the users. When there's only one data holder, our data user does not have to go to the health data access body, but has to go to the holder directly. But who decides purposes there? And that's what we see in all those research projects as well. Who decides purposes? It's the user. It's not the holder. Holder discloses. Why? Because the law says that it has to disclose, and it's the only reason why it will disclose. That's its purpose. It has a different purpose than the user. Nonetheless, they will be joint controllers. To what extent? I don't see it. And that highlights the difficulty of that qualification. It's the sliding scale. And case law of the European Union has not really, European Code of Justice has not really helped with that interpretation.
Thank you. So, Christophe, the floor is yours.
I will very quickly change the presentation. Click it away.
Thanks. Good morning, everybody. Thanks for introducing me, Maes, and thanks for Ruben for setting the scene. That makes it a little bit more easy. I'm not a lawyer at all. You will see what I've been doing in my life within some minutes. Yeah. We heard about challenges. We heard about opportunities. We heard about hurdles, burdens, everything. But I want to address, let's say, not the challenge, but the importance that GDPR and also European Health Data Space can endorse, can help us, and will oblige us to have good data quality. It's not my saying, already this was said in 2018 by Andy Haler, saying that we will endorse, we will ask, we will require the governments, the member state governments to oblige to have good data. And you will see, hopeful that you will see at the end of the presentation that we definitely need good data quality in order to comply to the GDPR and to the next steps of the HDS. But I'm always very, very, very surprised hearing about good data quality. I'm so surprised it's not there yet. Me as a patient, I expect that. Entering the hospital, entering GP practice, being a patient, I think that's normal. Everybody who is not living in Porto and who came by plane, you expect that the plane flies with good data. Otherwise, you'll not be in Porto, but maybe in China, maybe Shanghai, maybe wherever, maybe some more nice places, I don't know. But in my former life, I was an airplane pilot. I know what real world data is. Real world data is not data that are being complied, mapped 3, 4, 6 months later, cleaned. No, real world data is real world data. If our real world data is not good, if we have bad data, this is what happened. Unfortunately, not so long ago, one of the major important data we have in the plane, and we have a lot of data, I can assure you. We have more than 7,000 data fragments each second. We measure in the plane. Of course, we don't see that on a dashboard or in a very nice Excel spreadsheet, as I see researchers doing, because you don't see anything. We have 5 important parameters, but I'm not going to learn you fly. But this is the discrepancy between aviation and healthcare. It's our health. Data quality, we heard it yesterday already. It's a complex dynamic. It's being or having the proper training. It's not the items only for the IT. It's not only for IT people, not at all. It's a team thing. It's the same in the aviation. It's not only the pilot thing, it's the aviation, it's the technical staff, it's the ground staff, it's other planes. So this is a community and we have to deal with that. But of course, and I think maybe the healthcare and reuse of data, secondary use of data, should have a look of how this is managed in aviation. But so far related to aviation. When we look at the GDPR, there are some very practical questions. We heard from the data providers, we heard from industry providing mHealth apps and whatever. As a manufacturer, I'm not a manufacturer, but we hear this all the time. As a subject, I have the right to access my data. I have the right to receive a copy of the data. Okay, no problem. I have the right to correct my incorrect data, name, IDs, whatever. We should be able to correct it. I have the right to be forgotten within 30 days. I have the right to have limiting processing of my personal data. Sounds easy for a big company. We have big companies who organize this very well, but we have thousands, millions of very small companies looking to mHealth apps, looking to maybe a bigger ones, the HR providers, dealing with data, but if I, as a subject, I ask, okay, I want to be forgotten within 30 years, it's a challenge to find me, because in one app, I can have an account under 3 different names, 3 different personalities, 3 incorrect data items. So it's very difficult to find. If you don't have data of good quality, you never find. So if I ask one of these things and you cannot find me, how will you be compliant with the regulations? This is one of the reasons why good data, shall we admit her? Yeah. This is one of the very important reasons why we need good data. So as a company, former slide was as a subject, now as a company, I need to find my data. Where is it stored? Being involved in certifications of small and medium and also big enterprises. And we ask, where are the data? I am the app developer, so I know what's happening in my app. I store my data somewhere else. I don't know where these data are. So this is a very inappropriate and a difficult way to be compliant again. So as you see, from a subject point of view, from a GDPR point of view, I think GDPR is helping all the instruments that are available to improve their data, because it's necessary. It will be necessary. Otherwise you will have fines, and there are big fines nowadays, very big ones. So not only my data quality, but within the GDPR, I don't know the articles by heart, I'm not a lawyer, article 30, 32, 35, and I'm sure I will miss some articles. It's pretty well defined that I have to be able to show, if I have an assessment, that I'm lawfully and transparently in a way I'm working. So this is a very important thing, that all my data are kept in a good accuracy and are current. So all these elements, I won't go into detail, they ask, they demand from a regulatory point of view, from a legal point of view, me as a software data handler, data broker, whatever, I should comply. If I don't have good quality of data, I'm down as the Ethiopian airline, completely lost. Ruben also mentioned AGS. Here, I just pictured AGS. The green circles are the primary use, the blue circles are the secondary use. And even in the primary and the secondary use related to reuse use of the health data, we see quality aspects arise. So again, not only from GDPR, privacy, environment, we need a high quality of data, but also from the HDS, we definitely need. So data should be complete, should have a high accuracy, should be cataloged, should be fair. We have also techniques to measure data quality. All these aspects are mentioned in the regulations. So the regulation should not be a hurdle, a burden, but it should facilitate the companies to think about why do they have problems with GDPR? Why do they have problems with AGS? Because the data they cannot fulfill. They know they are not compliant with. And that's why they think GDPR, oh, it's an administrative, it's illegal, it's again bureaucratic items. No, you should use both systems to improve all data quality. But then, of course, in a lot of countries, a lot of member states, companies are asked, are you compliant with GDPR? So everybody says, of course I am. Of course. who will say, no, I'm not. Of course I'm not. Nobody will do that. But it's just a tick box on honor. Yes, I'm compliant. So maybe we can do it like that. Just put a pin with, yes, I'm compliant, and you're gone. You're safe until the Ruben Roex of this world come and visit you and say, let's take off your badge. You're not compliant. So that's why IHD, coming from a lot of European projects, we have already very long way. We developed criteria, because if you read, I don't know, I will not make Ruben a friend anymore, but okay. If you read the legal text, the regulatory text, and if you're not a lawyer, you don't understand anything about it. Anything. Yeah. After 3 pages, 3 articles, you're either asleep, either you close your PC, because that's not concrete, it's not practical. Because I'm not a lawyer, I'm not a practical. Yes, I'm a very practical guy, just flying, see 5 numbers, as easy as it is. So we try to translate the articles in criteria, in understandable criteria, so the companies, they have something they can compare with. Reading the criteria, so you say, okay, we have that. No, we have that process not okay. It's not okay at this moment, so we can improve. So that's why we developed in 6 different criteria sets together with Nathan, and coming from a lot of European projects related to GDPR, because IHD is really involved in all these aspects. So we developed a criteria set. It's a journey. We go with the companies. It's just a journey. We have the criteria. The companies have to improve. We take them on the journey, and at the end, they can be assessed by, of course, other people then, the people who take you on the journey. Just first of all to improve. And one of the important aspects are, of course, data quality within the legal framework. I will stop, I hope, within time.
It's splendid. Right on time.
Right. Because I'm not a lawyer. I'm glad to take questions, or if
Absolutely.
you
I
prefer.
was thinking, could we have at least one question to Christophe?
It's a very personal question. I'm just wondering why the leap from aviation into health data.
Both are boring. Sitting in the cockpit doing nothing because the plane does everything. So I thought I'd move on to something exciting, because it's boring.
Also related to the incentives. Because they are related to the incentives to be compliant or not compliant. We have to apply pilot within the area of questions. That's healthcare is a bit different. The owner who is driving the action is not the patients.
There are a lot of drivers within the ecosystem. There are a lot of drivers, not only from the sponsor point of view, but from the regulator point of view. Also, but that's not the main reason why already big companies are getting involved in this system, because of the fines. But it's not because of the money, because if you're a big company and you have to pay a big fine, no problem, you just pay it and it's, but it's the perception towards the public, towards your end users, towards the data subject. That's a real issue. That's what we feel. That's what they say, okay, it would be good that everybody, every stakeholder within the ecosystem of the data flow has the same level of compliance, because it's very difficult as when the several stakeholders are involved. We as one data element go through the complete process. Where am I? And who is responsible? That's again a legal thing. But who is responsible? I think, oh no, you are, let's say you are the data keeper, you provide the storage, so you are responsible. No, I'm the responsible. Oh, no, the sponsor is responsible. They all point to each other, and that's a very difficult. And they want the different stakeholders, they want everybody to have within the same ecosystem, the same labeling. So I can trust you. You are handling my data or coming from my data subject. I provide up to you. I can trust you. We can trust each other. Can you be 100% compliant with GDPR? No, because that's where the lawyers are there. Yeah? It's very, you never can be, but the more you adhere to the criteria set, the more you are compliant and the more difficult the lawyers will have to say, there is an open opportunity. That's why and it's a continuous maintaining system, of course.
All right. Thank you, Christophe. So Darren, the floor is yours.
Could you stop sharing?
We sorted this out.
Reassured that my laptop won't take USB sticks. It's a good thing from an information governance and information security perspective, but it's a nightmare trying to get a presentation up and running. So that's what they would think.
Yeah, always pros and cons.
Okay. Hopefully everyone can see that. My name is Darren Lloyd. I'm the Associate Director for Information Governance and Patient Safety. So, there hasn't been any recent seismic activity. Wales is definitely still attached to the UK. It's just that I'm just representing the fact that we're talking about NHS Wales here. There's a wider community obviously with the UK. So there's a number of things to consider. Of course, the UK is slightly divorced when it comes to some of the GDPR aspects and considerations. As now we've got a UK version of the General Data Protection Regulations because of our movement out of some of the European partnership that we have. So this is a bit of self-promotion as well, and what we're doing within NHS Wales in order to drive up data quality, but through a lens of data sharing and data compliance and data governance. So we have a number of different organisations that contribute to all of that. They are commissioners of services at the primary, secondary and tertiary care levels as well. So they buy in all of those aspects that are required to make that global response to healthcare within NHS Wales. Wales Health is devolved. Decision-making and policy area is within the Welsh context. So there are policy leads, ministers that make the decisions around how health is conducted within Wales. We have a population of only 3.2 million patients and citizens within a wider population of about 66 million within the UK. So a small amount of individuals, you would suggest, across the whole, if you take a reflection of the whole European area. However, some of the challenges are no smaller. Some of the challenges when it comes to information governance are just as large, and some of the resources required are still as complicated. What we've done in Wales is to try and develop a framework, an information governance framework that actually promotes that information sharing, that drives up some aspects of data quality. We find that it's without a framework, the challenge of making information available to services providing health and care becomes a far more difficult thing to try and construct. So what we're trying to do is internally, as part of Digital Health and Care Wales, consume that framework ourselves, but also promote that framework to all of those different organisations and all of those kind of contributors to NHS services. So we are part and parcel of a network and an infrastructure that allows a greater understanding of what information sharing means across the service. So we are promoting the products and the services required for that. So we have concepts of frameworks that actually drive up that requirement for information sharing. So we have a framework for sharing, we have frameworks for assurance, frameworks for advice, frameworks for access, and frameworks for training. All of those in an ecosystem of allowing that greater information sharing requirement across those organisations. It wasn't that long ago with those separate organisations didn't have the same concept, and that information was locked within those separate organisations for one reason or another, whether it was technical, cultural, or just not necessarily understanding the law and the lawful requirements of actually allowing data to flow and data to share. As colleagues might promote, that information governance shouldn't be the blocker in order to create a a robust economy for sharing data. And this is the way that we're trying to unlock those things. So we've already got a product set within Wales that allows us to promote that really, I suppose that allowance of ensuring the data goes to the right areas in a timely manner, both from a primary, secondary and tertiary care perspective. It doesn't cover every piece of activity, but what it allows us to do is promote some of these frameworks. So we have something called the Wales Accord for Sharing Personal Information, a framework that allows organisations to look at a standard approach to information sharing. And we're talking about standardisation here again. Standard approach for information sharing. We've got something called the Information Governance Toolkit that allows organisations to measure themselves against GDPR compliance, other compliance with information governance becomes important. And we've got some strides to actually move part of what we have as an Information Governance Toolkit into all of those services that want to provide NHS healthcare services within Wales. We also have a framework for advice. So much as colleagues have said here today, there's a lot of myth and legend around interpretation of information governance, and certainly within the law. So what we do is, as a set of professionals within my team, we try and provide advice to individual organisations that may have some tricky discussions and difficult decisions to make and don't necessarily know where the balance of that interpretation comes. We also have a framework for access. This is an acronym, so you'll have to apologise. This is our National Intelligent Integrated Auditing System. So we have a lot of key systems that actually share 3.2 million patient records. The entire population, we have some key systems that move across those geographical boundaries within Wales to allow us to share very key bits of information around the patient, the demographics, the test results, their care records, their episodes, a number of other key aspects of that patient to be shared across the piece, basically. So our NIAS, for short, allows us to monitor access to that data because we have to balance the full availability of that patient record across all of those constructs against the confidentiality of making sure that that patient information is safe and secure at the point that that health professional requires access to the data. So you have a piece of monitoring software that actually ensures that those professionals that are accessing 3.2 million records are accessing them for the right reasons, and we can maintain that promise of confidentiality to the patient as much as we can. We also have a framework for training that allows us to push out standard approaches for training as well. So statutory and mandatory training, things where we need to educate the whole population of those users within that framework of the right things and the wrong things to do with data and information sharing. So we see all of those things as are part and parcel of one of the part of the economy that drives data quality, because we're providing some assurance around what individuals' responsibility should be doing in the construction of information governance. I'm constantly balancing between where that balance between availability and confidence needs to be. So these products and these services help to rebalance or balance the position about the availability of that data in a very complex, even in a Welsh perspective, a very complex environment where data needs to be at the point of care. That data needs to be there available to many, many health professionals under many different circumstances. Healthcare is more transient, patients are more transient, so the data has to be more transient, it needs to be more accurate, and the quality of that data obviously has to come into frame on that. So I'm constantly balancing those things on a daily basis in terms of how do we actually do them. This is in a much wider model of what we need to do from an information governance perspective. So IG is just in a much wider model of how we do that kind of that maturing. So we've got privacy, stewardship, of course, data quality is one element within that overall model of security of that kind of the model of data governance. So for us, it's a large puzzle, but we're starting to move into strides of understanding how that puzzle fits together under the circumstances. The one thing about partnership approach, we've talked about regulators in different sessions as well. We have a very close relationship with our regulator, our Information Commissioner's Office in Wales. We do things site scene. So if we want to rebalance that confidentiality and that availability question, we do it with a commissioner. The commissioner is very much part and parcel of the conversations that we have with the patient, the conversations that we have with the health professional, and the conversations that we need to have internally. So the Information Commissioner sees all the good things and the bad things together in terms of how we try and rebalance those things. So from my perspective, the partnership approach across the piece with all of those players, patients, public, health professionals, and the regulator are really important. And for us, the ICO is a very big component part of that. And they're very supportive of what we try to do as an NHS services within Wales. I've rattled through that to try and give you a little bit more time back, but that's essentially it.
I was thinking, any questions? Darren?
Could I just ask, the frameworks that you set out, are they unique to Wales, or are they part of a broader NHS approach to information governance? Because obviously you have cross-border movement of
course, yes.
patients and population.
The products are unique to Wales, but the concepts are, I would say, more ubiquitous across the UK. So whilst we've described them that way, the narrative is described in a slightly different Welsh context, but some of the aspects are there. They might not be as together in some respects in terms of, if you look, obviously we have a porous border within Wales, so we need to share a lot of data across border for the patients. We push a lot of patients out into England, etc. So that is another challenge. Our narrative is slightly different. So, but there are similarities, let's just say, in terms of how we actually do that, but it isn't exactly the same.
Congratulations on your presentation. What will be one recommendation for those countries that come from Latin America that are on the roadmap to strengthen their data governance ecosystem?
Never underestimate working in partnership with all of those stakeholders. Make sure that all of those stakeholders who are delivering primary care, secondary care, or any care, however you construct care, is that they come with you and they're part of the decision making, because that's what allows you to put the frameworks together and everybody wanting to be part of it. Because anybody can set a series of standards. Compliance is part of a very big challenge, I think. So unless it's absolutely mandated and it's within the law under certain circumstances, even then, compliance with the law, as we said, sometimes isn't that good. But I think it's about having a conversation with all of those key stakeholders and they want to be part of that almost community of collective standardization.
Thank you very much.
I think we can take a third one. We had another question, right? Maybe not, but I have one. So what are the differences between your framework in Wales and the rest of the UK? Are there any differences?
I think it's similar to the previous question, I suppose. So ours is just a slightly different narrative, trying to represent the population as we have it within Wales and the user base as well, those health boards and those trusts, primary care providers, those type of things. So you know, we're grounded in general data protection regulations. We're grounded in the same lawful requirements, but our narrative is tried to be slightly different in order to allow that population of those healthcare providers to be part of the community of wanting to be standard, having that standard approach to things.
Right. Thank you. Thank you very much, Darren. Ruben, I need your assistance, and now the floor is yours, Richard.
Thank you very much, Matt. Oh, great. Well, thank you very much. My name is Richard Yeatman, and I am the Chief Technical Officer at IgniteData. And I think my talk's a bit different from the last three, so I hope it keeps you all interested. But I'm going to come at this from a vendor perspective. We build a software platform, so I'm going to talk a little bit about the platform itself and what it actually does. And then I try to put some spice into it around information governance and how that impacts us as a supplier when we're trying to work with different hospitals. So to make it a little bit interactive, first and foremost, does anybody in this room by show of a hand know what EHR to EDC is? Anybody? Well, it's quite a few. Okay, good, right, all right, that helps. So let's move forward. And actually, that's not working, is it? There we go. And as full disclosure as well, our chair today, Maes, actually works for IgniteData as well. I should probably say that. So he may get interactive with me at some points in the session. We'll see how it goes. So information governance is at the heart of absolutely everything IgniteData do as an organization. And it's quite fortuitous, really, that I'm here today speaking at an IHD event, because IHD and DIPAC were part of the vendor assessment process that you can see on the screen there. So IHD were brought together by AstraZeneca, Sanofi and Janssen to do an assessment on the market of what different people are doing with the HR2EDC technologies. And by some miracle at that point in time, we ended up at the top of that ranking in that assessment. So if it wasn't for IHD and DIPAC and the team, I probably wouldn't be stood here today talking to all of you. Earlier this year, we had a big step change in the business after COVID and the grant funding that had helped us kick off building the platform and the software. And that was when ZX Associates, a US corporate, invested several $1 million into the business to try and propel us forward and move EHR2EDC into the next phase. And obviously a key component of this talk and everything that we do is about transferring regulatory grade data. So information governance is obviously a key topic that we're here to discuss, but when we're dealing with pharmaceutical companies, we've also got GXP compliance to think about. We've got ISO 27001, penetration testing, and all these different things, which naturally make it a very expensive space to play in, if nothing else. So if I can draw your attention to these two pictures here, an artist very kindly made this for us several years ago when we first started off this project. And if you look at the picture on the left-hand side, this was the world that we saw, especially in my life back when I worked at King's College Hospital and we were looking at research and improving data set quality there. It's intense. You've got data managers running around trying to fill in data. And there's so much of it is already there in the electronic health record. If we're looking at labs and things like that, you're just re-keying swivel chair. I saw metadata use in the press release this week. So we want to get rid of this problem. We want to reduce this burden. And we envisage this nirvana on the right-hand side. And that's a cloud-based application that drills into the medical records on behalf of the staff of the hospital to find the right data, pull that out, allow them to review it, because that's important for GCP and data governance. The hospital retains control and pushes that data through to, in most use cases, the EDC system, but it doesn't have to be an EDC system. It could be other system. Janssen's program, for example, is called EHR to sponsor, not EHR to EDC. And why? Why is that important? So it's important because we need to bring down certain costs. It's not only the time burden for the hospitals, it's also the source data verification burden for the pharmaceutical company, the monitoring costs, interim database lock, and full database lock at the end of the cycle. If we can bring all of these things down, if you think trials cost millions of pounds a day to keep running and most of them run late, that's what we're trying to fix. Multifaceted problem. So as a piece of software, it works with mainly structured data domains. At the moment, we are looking at unstructured data domains as well. But laboratory information is interesting for us because typically now it's coming from a LIMS system in the labs and it's going back in a very structured format into the electronic health record. We're interested in vital sign information as that's more regularly captured in a digital format in a lot of larger hospitals. Concomitant medications, tricky space. Sometimes it's structured, sometimes it's not, sometimes it's a bit of both. But fortunately, at some of the larger hospitals we've been working with, it's very well curated. And then demographics information, which often isn't an intense data domain in a clinical study, but it's still useful. So this is an example of a study that we are doing with Maes' ex-company, AstraZeneca. So it's a gastro-oncology study. It's got 900 patients in it. Obviously, we're not dealing with 900 patients at the moment. We've just kicked this off in Mirror. Last week, right? Yes. So the patients are enrolling and we're transferring real patient data through this system into AstraZeneca's RAVE EDC. And fortunately, touch wood, so far it's going extremely well. It's hidden by this box, unfortunately, at the top here, but that's about 1,300 data points that we're actually connecting to in the ECRS. That only accounts for 15% of the forms in the study, but what that translates to is actually over 50% of the data capture in the entire study. So rather than, I've lost my train of thought. So yeah, so with SAEs and AEs and unscheduled visits, that can actually increase to maybe 60, 70%, we don't know. But the unstructured data will make a big difference. The 3 minutes you can see there is something that was put in place by Sanofi as part of the HR2EDC consortium when they looked at data entry time and SDV monitoring. And by applying that and extrapolating that across the study, we can see that we get a time reduction, potential time reduction of in almost 70 hours across for the pharmaceutical company and for the hospital site itself. So it makes a massive difference and a huge impact. So I'll skim over this quickly because I'm conscious of time, but this is the solution itself. So Archer is a cloud-based solution. It uses HL7 Fire to connect to hospital sites, to talk to the electronic health records. So we're accredited by Epic, Cerner's, the Allscripts. We embed our application directly into the electronic health record as far as the site staff are concerned. They never leave that environment. It looks like it's part of Epic, for example. There's a screenshot that you'll all see in a minute. And then on the right-hand side, we connect to different EDC systems. So Raise, Sysis, Castor, a few different ones we connect to. What we do is we pull the metadata structure of the study into quite a complex mapping engine, which is in the middle here. And that allows us to create scalable business rules around the study so that when the clinician runs the app at the hospital, it runs the business rules and it's able to pull out the correct data. Max will shoot me if I don't say this, but it's we like to refer to it as a virtual research assistant. So it's not a fully autonomous system. And again, because we're talking about data quality and governance, this is about GCP compliance here as well. It's important that there's clinical oversight of the data going across into the EDC systems when it's going to be used for regulatory compliance purposes and licensing. The example we like to give often is, you know, and there was an aviation example in one of the last talks from Christophe. You know, AI, the business rules can land planes, but you wouldn't necessarily feel comfortable as a passenger. I know I wouldn't, being sat in a plane that was landing by itself if there wasn't a pilot there to take over. And really, that analogy works quite well with clinical research data and information governance compliance as well. So this is Archer running inside Epic. We're not allowed to show much of Epic because they're extremely sensitive about what we can and can't show, but you can see it pops out and out inside there, and then the clinicians are able to run through it. We did have a video that I would have loved to have shown you, but I don't have the time. And Epic also got funny about that and said that we have to ask permission for it, so not today. So our information governance learnings from running this type of software and doing these type of projects. First and foremost, it seems like a really stupid, obvious point, but it's really not easy. It's very hard. When we start up a project with a new hospital, and we're going to integrate the solution at the site, I would say the information governance side of it and going through the DPIAs and bits and pieces like that for GDPR is a longer process by quite some margin than the actual technical implementation of the solution at the site. It just is. Going through the different committees, talking to different people, filling out the different forms, and I don't know what the people in this room's experience is, but every single time we get a DPIA from a hospital is different. Right, I see some nods every single time. And some are really simple and some are unbelievably complicated. And I don't know, maybe this is something that Christophe can help advise us on or sites on, but I don't know where the boundary lies of what is good or isn't, you know, and how much we actually need to do. Retention is a key point for us. So a lot of data processing tools, when you're working with hospitals, they want to retain data, they want to take data, especially if we're in the United States. Archer as a tool doesn't retain data, it's not what we do, we don't persist it. would be the words. So we push data through to different sponsor systems. We keep certain information for regulatory compliance purposes, and then we destroy the information that we process. So also there's a certain amount of fear in hospitals about what you're going to be doing with their data. And finally, the control aspect of it as well. So when we build software, we build it from the hospital's perspective first, foremost, and we want to give them control. You see a lot of pharmaceutical companies, or you see a lot of providers of software to pharmaceutical companies trying to build integrations into hospitals, almost like backdoor data extracts where they're going to get the information out directly, and the hospital kind of loses control of that piece of information. That's not what we're trying to do. So I've already touched on this a little bit. So we're trying to build platforms with the mindset of hospital first. And we do this predominantly by minimizing the amount of data that we take from the hospital, first and foremost. So if you don't need it, don't take it. If you don't need to query it, don't query it. We don't persist the data, which I've already touched on as well. Again, if you don't need it, don't keep it. There's no point. We have to keep certain information, especially again, we're talking about information governance, we're talking about compliance. We need to keep certain information for regulatory compliance, right? So if the FDA or the EMA or whoever wanted to trace back and have a look at where the information came from in our system, we need that auditability or traceability in the system. So how do we do that? We do that, again, we're thinking about information governance. We're thinking about how can we retain this information without exposing any risk to the patient. So we use cryptographic hashing to pull through any information we need. So if we need to go back to the hospital and do any comparison of data, that can be done again by the hospital in the platform with them having control, because they just reassess the information, it rehashes it. All we do is a comparison of hashes. So again, just thinking through what you need to do to keep your solutions compliant. I'm not going to go into this because Mats has just called 1 minute, so I've got about 30 seconds left. But let's not go here because this is a big slide in itself. So final point, UCLH. This is a quote from Dr. Wai-Kyung Wong, who's the Chief Research Information Officer, a very good friend of mine and huge advocate for the work that we've been doing at IgniteData. We're live there now. We're live in several sites in the US and further sites in the UK. It's an exciting time. And I know from Dr. Wong's perspective, it's really helped improve the data quality of the trust. My closing statement is probably that the first time we ran the tool at UCLH, they had never seen the FHIR feeds out of their electronic health record system. We've heard a bit about FHIR this morning. We were the first people to take those out and give them back to them so that they could have a look at what actually came out of the system. And one of the first things that we learned is, hang on a minute, we capture that data. Why is it not in the feed? And then we're able to go back to the IT department and we found out that it was just because they actually put this piece of data into a different field. And nobody knew that they should put it into that field because nobody had ever looked at the FHIR feeds and how it was concept mapped and wired up. So yeah, that's it. Thank you very much for listening. I hope it was useful.
Thank you very much, Richard. And as being a very proud strategic advisor for IgniteData, because I've been swimming in this area I was the EHR to EDC Global Integration Lead, and also previous coordinator of EHR for the operator. So this has been one of the holy grails for the industry. I just would like to make it absolutely clear why this is important for academic and, of course, also industry-led clinical trials. About 50% of data that we generate in our trials is duplicated. This EHR to EDC electronic health records to electronic data capture issue, the problem is a huge problem. And why is that important? Because I think it's, if we can solve this, it will take, I think, one of the important messages is that we can take medicines faster to patients. So this is an issue for all of us. And I remember also when talking to one of the hospitals in the EHR to EDC consortium. So we have seen some of the benefits from the sponsor side, but also from the hospital side, that this will provide sort of reduced site burden, as we're saying. But that person, she said to me, it's not really about that. which is the big game. The big game with this is that if we can solve this, it will allow new medical research that otherwise would never ever taken place. I think that's quite profound. And that is some mission that everyone, I think, can subscribe on. The other thing that I'm talking to my previous industry, AI and machine learning guys, several times in AstraZeneca, and said, EHR to EDC is not about mining electronic health records, full stop. It is only part of randomized clinical trial and that informed consent procedure that makes GDPR bomb-proof. And it's only about finding those data elements that are required in our electronic case reports, full stop. They were sort of a little bit gloomy about that, but that's important thing to say, right? And I think this is data should be entered once. And my final thing, as sort of spokesman for the industry also, that if this is going to fly, there is one important front and center aspect, and that is data quality, right? It is the foundation of this. So, thank you, Richard.
You're welcome.
Questions? Yeah.
Use it while the trial is running, when it's running already, right? So
yeah.
Regarding the feasibility space, because that's also important if you want to select the site to be part of the clinical trial, and also to be faster. Are there any plans also to include this sort of information? Because at least in my hospital, what's happened is that most of the time there are electronic feasibilities, but they are also not structured. So you cannot say how many patients they ask for a farm, but the farm doesn't come with a code, so it's not an international code. These are not coded out neither. So at the same point, then you cannot use the information because it's not asked in the right way. So
Yeah. So your question is fundamentally about feasibility, and is what we're doing going to start looking at feasibility specifically?
Also, yes. Because at the end of the day, you can capture it.
Yeah.
You need to know where it is.
Yes.
What you're doing.
Yes.
So, what you're doing here is facilitating all the processes of collecting information in the clinical trial.
Yeah, precisely. So this is post-consent that we're dealing with here. The trials that we're working on are predominantly phase 1 to phase 3, mostly in the oncology setting.
I'm talking about prior to that phase.
Yeah, so could you do feasibility, patient recruitment?
Select the.
Yeah. In theory, with the way HL75 feeds are going, if you had a full file server in a data warehouse at the hospital, or if you're using a partial file server at Cerner or Epic or something like that, they are moving to a world where they've got bulk data APIs. So in theory, you could start building apps to do that. How much you throttle the hospital's APIs, the data there, I just don't know. But yeah, I would say out the scope for what we're doing here. I mean, there's a lot of companies that are trying to solve that patient recruitment and feasibility problem. I was with Trinetics just the other day, for example, in London. You've got the Planarians of this world, the Antidotes, and all these sorts of companies that are trying to solve that space. This is a difficult, expensive problem to solve. And getting to the space where we've got the nirvana of even those structured data sets being transferred post-consent is a multi-billion-dollar global problem. So it's, yeah, so that's probably not the answer you want. But.
So I'm conscious of not trespassing too much on Daniel's talk. So and also that it is Daniel that are between you and the lunch.
This challenge.
Sorry, we have a question on mindset.
All right. Yes, that's
okay.
Absolutely. So
I can try and answer another one.
Could you comment on the ECD to EHR? One thing is to get data from hospital.
Sorry.
Could you comment on ECD to EHR? One thing is to get data from the hospital for clinical trial. Another is to enrich the patient record with clinical trial data. It is very important for patients and providers to have a clinical record instead of having to collect twice. Note, obviously, this is for data collected in the EDC and not coming from the EHR.
Yeah, okay, so the question is, we're pushing data to the EDC. Is it possible to also get data that's been generated during the clinical trial back to the EHR as well?
As I understand,
fundamentally,
but I can wait until.
No, that's, I think that's what they're asking. I mean, so that's interesting. I think if you're writing data back to an electronic health record, that's an extremely sensitive, risky space. So from the perspective of what we're doing and keeping things simple, it's not something we've looked at in great detail, but we've certainly looked at the idea of building out some PDF reports of what's been transferred and pushed back. Again, I think in an ideal world, if the system in the middle, I mean, the long-term view, I think EDC is going to reduce the amount of EDC that we use. That's certainly where we're going over time. So if Archer as a tool can do more of that in the middle while it's transferring data and push information back to the EHR as well, we would like to get there, but it's a complex area. You're welcome. Sorry, Daniel.
Thank you very much. Well, I will try to be consistent and as fast as I can to avoid to boring you a lot. Well, my name is Daniel Otzoy Garcia. I am from Guatemala, so I'm very far, a galaxy far, far away from here. Of course, it's a different world, of course. Well, I have many hats, actually. I work for Jon Snow Inc., that is a company, a US-based company. It's a public health company. The main activity is provide public health services. Well, our 85% of our budget is funded by USAID, that is the United States International Development Agency. But additionally, I am the executive director of the Central American Health Informatics Network, RECAINSA. That is an initiative funded in 2013, and we work in all the Latin American countries. So as I said, I have many hats. I will speak about the global perspectives, some examples about the governance, especially focusing the digital transformation process. My experience is more in the international cooperation side. So probably my point of view will be more in the high level, in the macro level, not in the implementation level. But there are some guidance and some frameworks that, at least in Latin America, are the guiding principles for the digital transformation of the health sector. One of them is the WHO and ITU National E-Health Strategy Toolkit that is from, I think that 2012 was developed by those two organizations. Basically, the 7 building blocks that you can see there are at the current time are the guiding principles in most of the digital health strategies in Latin America. Additionally, well, after many years without a global digital health strategy, we finally have one that was launched by the WHO in 2021. Actually, the strategy is from 2020 to 2025, but after a lot of discussions, finally in 2021, it was released. And well, the one of the key topics this strategy includes is precisely the collaboration. That is something that several of my fellow speakers have talked about, and I think that is very important in terms of the governance, the collaboration, and that is included in this strategy. We see the necessity to promote the digital health strategies, because most of the countries, the reality is that they don't have at this point digital health strategies in Latin America. So this is a huge challenge because as we can imagine, if we don't have a strategy, a northern it's complicated to have a roadmap for the digital transformation. So we have a special challenge in this part. So I think that the global strategy is including this part as a key element and advocate for people-centered health systems. And this is really interesting because most of the information systems in Latin America are focused more in the provider necessity and not necessarily in the citizen, right? So we are having important challenges in the adoption of these kind of strategies because that depends of changing the model that we provide the health services and the information system are designed. Another important framework is the 8 principles for the digital transformation of the public health sector that was launched by the Pan American Health Organization, that is the regional office of WHO in the Americas. These 8 principles basically are guiding principles for the countries too. But there are some interesting topics like universal connectivity, for example, because most of the countries in Latin America, as you can imagine, we don't have connectivity. It's an important challenge. Mobile connectivity is a huge opportunity at this moment, but we are still dealing with these challenges. So to have interoperability, for example, is an important challenge because we don't have this kind of possibilities. We have the challenge of the adoption of artificial intelligence because the data quality, for example. So even that we have at this moment some interesting experiences in a small scale, it's a huge challenge to scale up in a broader level because the data quality is an important issue. We have a lot of isolated systems, the interoperability that we include in this framework. It's something challenging. The adoption of some standards is a trend topic now. For example, HL7 and FHIR is a common standard now, but we are still in the first stage of the adoption of this kind of standardization. So the lack of standardization is a huge problem or huge challenge that these kind of frameworks try to address and help. But especially there is a interesting principle related with the public health architecture, because I think that one of the big challenges is the design of the architecture. There are, as I said, some trends to adopt some kind of standards, but we are having several challenges in the architecture, in the design of the architecture and the different layers, including the data security, the data interoperability, etc., etc. So, well, one of the most important probably topics of discussion now is how to build ecosystems, because commonly the government is the main provider of services in our countries, and we are having some changes in several business models in the healthcare sector. So it's a necessity to create this kind of ecosystem to integrate all the actors, all the stakeholders, and that's an important regulation thing, because we don't have current legislation to cover and create this kind of ecosystem to regulate adequately the relationship between the stakeholders. So we are facing interesting challenges in this part. We have a interesting stakeholder in the most of the Latin American countries that is the international cooperation that they are funding, including the European Union, a lot of projects related with digital health, with data. So we have a very interesting challenge to incorporate all these stakeholders, including the international cooperation, to the governance mechanisms. And finally, there is an interesting approach that Recainsa, the network that I represent to, is promoting, that is the health data governance principles. These principles are promoted by the Transform Health Coalition, that is an organization from different organizations around the world. And these principles are focused in three main areas. The first one is protect people. The second is promote health value. And the third one is prioritize equity. So I think that this is an important approach because the balance, as one of the speakers mentioned, the balance between the access and the privacy is a huge challenge. It's a lot. There are a lot of discussion around how is the perfect measure to open data and to ensure the security. During the pandemic and after the pandemic, we are facing a lot of challenges in terms of the cybersecurity part in the health sector in Latin America. And those situations have scared a lot the governments, and the governments are stopping a lot the strategies to have more open data. That is a huge challenge in several countries. These kind of principles invite to the countries to adopt this kind of discussions, at least, to find with the ecosystem the adequate measure between the open data and the privacy and security. Well, we have some interesting cases, success cases. In Latin America, there are some countries with a maturity in terms of the digital transformation. One of them, probably the best country in terms of digital government in Latin America, that is Uruguay. Uruguay, they have a national EHR. This is a system based in federated system and interoperability. So they have the 90% of the population with EHR in the country. It's a small country, 3 million people. But it's an interesting, successful case because they started the process several, I think in 2008, more or less. And they built a governance structure as a first point. They created the regulation necessary to ensure that all providers, private and public providers, adopted the standards, adopted the regulation necessary to incorporate the different system to the national interoperability POS, because they don't centralize the information in one system. They have federated systems, as I said. Another interesting case is Costa Rica, the Social Security Fund, that is the most important provider in the country. They have a EHR2, and they have more or less 80% of the population in a country of 6 million people. So they have an interesting process, collecting all the data, making available the data for the psychiatrician to improve the quality of the care of the patients. But at this point, probably they will have challenges in terms of the use of this data, because they have focused very much in the collection. But at this point, they are facing challenges in terms to use the data to the, for example, with the adoption of artificial intelligence or other kind of intervention. And finally, the experience of Chile through SENSE, that is the National Center of Health Information Systems, that is a group formed by different stakeholders. So this is interesting in terms of the governance, because they included with the SENSE, the government, the universities, the private sector, and the civil society. So that ensures that they can discuss with all the ecosystem the topics related, for example, with regulation, data security, standards, the workforce, that is something very important, the digital literacy. So in terms of governance, I think that this is the most successful case in Latin America, additionally to the Uruguay case. So this is a little bit about Latin America. I hope that this tropical view is helpful too. Thank you.
Absolutely on time. Personally, I think it was fantastic to hear how things work in South America. This is the first time I'm sort of looking into it, and quite promising. Uruguay case looks like the Estonia case in Europe. Anyway, any questions to Daniel? Sure.
I've got one, I think. So the national IT model that you gave the case study on, do you think that's achievable in a country with a larger population? I'm thinking about in the UK, we had under Tony Blair the national project for IT NP Fit. And I remember at the time when I was coming into work and going into that, it was an absolute catastrophe. Do you think that model can be scaled up or not?
Well, it's an interesting question. I think that one of the most important discussion is always around the governance. Who is the leader in the digital transformation, especially because we have the ministries of health in charge of the regulation, or in many cases in Latin America, the healthcare delivery. But in digital health, we have the digital part that includes other sectors. So sometimes it's the most challenging part is to put all the stakeholders and to have, as I said, a national plan. Because sometimes the private sector is in one way, the government is another way, and the patients are demanding some things that are not accomplished by the private sector and for the government. So I think that this governance piece is the most important thing, and the regulatory frameworks, because we have a lot of gaps in terms of the regulation, for example, in the privacy of the data. And the governments, most of the governments decide to close the doors to have policy related with open data, because they protect the data, but in a model that is not available for no one. So I think that these two pieces are the most challenging.
You get the same thing with private companies as well, right? We see with electronic health record vendors, they don't want to give the data to people, really. They want to charge people.
Yeah, can I just come in on that? So the answer to his question is yes. It's definitely possible. It's done in Wales, the devolution of Manchester, one London, the failure of NPFIT, piloted on. There were 10 recommendations. 3 of them were about lack of clinical leadership. You can't deliver digital change without leadership. The others were about the speed of process of digital transformation. And the third was about standards. Until we have a regulatory authority for standards, is it SNOMED, is it FHIR, is it H17, for both information messaging and for information standards, we're not going to be in a position to join the data. So I would ask the chair, if I could, give you a question. Do you believe in semantic interoperability?
Yes, I do.
Do you think it's achievable?
Yes, I think. But one of my favorite things is it should be stepwise, prioritized approach. Anything else would be futile. So, and that means that I think that stepwise approach should be focused, and it should also be in a consensus with the most important stakeholders. Yes. And then, since I'm working almost 37 years in an evidence-based industry, that's life science industry, those kind of milestones deliverable towards semantic interoperability should provide very clear evidence in each of those steps. Otherwise, it will be sort of something that we just talk about, right?
Yeah, so the reason it's worked in these population examples is because we remove semantic interoperability and the commercial constraints by going for single systems. Therefore, you have control of the data standard. So we have Epic and we have Cerner. There's no commercial advantage for them delivering semantic interoperability, is there?
That's why they have to mandate Just one thing, because I just hold on that, Nathan, because I'm the chair, and I also would like to. There is a there is a question on this session, right? And I would like to check with you after these 5 excellent presentations today. And that is, should the quality of assurance of EHR systems to be market pull or push? Is it either of them or is it both? I'm just revisiting that questions because our excellent note taker, I would like to have that in the notes, which brings out to the actions tomorrow, right? So if you could sort of give your view.
Ultimately, talking about the ice systems.
So again?
It's both. Ultimately, you're talking about the ice systems.
Yeah.
It's both. Because we all got data. The ice system. Once you deploy the ice system, that's to provide data. It's to provide data collection. It's not change behaviors. Because there are a lot of onus on clinical users of these AI systems who run future data collection.
So you advocate for both, right?
Oh, you have to find a way to regulate both and manage both.
Hector?
I think say both as well. When it comes down to it, speaking in simple terms, if you try to push something, it's easier when there's a pull at the other end. We need to have that. Well, I think we do need to have that kind of general semantic interoperability to make sure we're speaking reading from the same page in terms of not only the standards, but also the practicalities of implementing the requirements around quality and the standards that we set, both independently and as a community as well. We can't have an independent regulator who's unschooled in the realities of running health systems digitally, and who doesn't look at the totality of the requirements. So we keep hearing in this conference, the workshop yesterday, context is everything. So understanding that context is important.
Yeah.
I'd say both. The difficulty is not the what, it's the how.
Yeah. So I covered that. And I do.
Richard, who asked the question a little bit earlier. So the US has a mandate to inclusion.
Yeah.
So if you leave it to the market, it may or may not happen. It may or may not happen to standard. And there are many variables. And so you have to have some degree of regulation. We actually need better systems. We need better engineering. It should be left to the purview of the commercial market to judge quality verification. At the end of the day, are our systems fit for purpose to ensure that optimization happens, safety of our inspections too, and to enable the decision, as well as to generate evidence generation, we're learning with the system as well. That's not going to be provided by just the commercial market.
No.
So unless we mandate that, then I think we're doing a bad job.
Yeah.
The HGS legislation. We will left
So, and I'm also personally an advocate for anything else would be sort of a bit too tight. So what I would like to have for our new note taker is what would be, we have already heard mandated from US. What would be another? So that would be push, right? What would be a pull? So really good pull. Yeah.
If you don't play targeted markets, so the pull is you can provide and then you've got access.
Good one. Yeah. So I'm happy, and I would like to give, I think, an applause to all the speakers. Excellent. And now it's lunch.